What is up guys, Blue Spooky here with another daily video. I've been a little under the weather lately and I've been seeing people saying that we've been getting a lot of repeat stories on the newest videos. So I'm going to slightly cut down the length of those videos. The longer ones will be about an hour and 30 minutes instead of 2 hours. That way there won't be so many stories I need to verify in them, and I'll have more time to go through them to make sure that they're not read before. I also want to remind you guys that I've read tens of thousands of these stories over the years, so there will be occasionally ones that you've maybe heard before here or somewhere else. Either I just forget sometimes, or I didn't track them down when I read them those years ago, or something like that. Sometimes things will slip through the cracks, but I do my best to make sure that I at least don't remember reading the stories before. If you guys are enjoying these videos, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. It really helps the videos and the channel to do well and ensures I can keep making these videos for you guys for a long time to come. Without further ado though, I will let you get right into the true scary stories, and I hope you guys will enjoy them and the rest of your day. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again at the end of the video. This happened when I was in my last year of high school. It was a dark night. I was in my bed sleeping with my back facing the wall. On my right side, I was resting very soundly, at least to the best of my recollection. That is, until I was suddenly woken up by something. It was a very strange situation for me. My eyes didn't open slowly and groggily like they do in the morning. You know how sometimes you take a moment to wake up and rub the sleep out of your eyes, maybe a little stretch or something. Instead, my eyes shot wide open, and I was fully awake and alarmed. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw a face staring right back at me. There was someone with me in the bed, sleeping side by side as though we'd been sleeping together all night. I was unable to distinguish the gender of this person. The only thing I could really make out in the darkness of the room was the emotion on their face. They looked angry and somewhat sad. It was horrifying. All this was ascertained in just a matter of moments, and I couldn't bring myself to look for long. Even though I only saw it very, very briefly, the image is burned into my memory forever. I don't know why I didn't immediately freak out more than I did. I guess because I was so surprised. I must have thought it was just a nightmare or something, because I was so scared that I reacted purely by muscle memory and turned away from whoever this was. On my other side now, I noticed the alarm clock said it was just after 1 a.m. As soon as I turned over, it was like a lock was set or something. I was stuck and couldn't move a single muscle. It was the first time in my life that something like that had ever happened to me. Now, I can only guess that it was a bout of sleep paralysis, but in the moment I couldn't even make a single sound. I could feel my eyelids getting heavy and closing. I tried my best to open them, but I just couldn't do it. I was wide awake but couldn't open my eyes. All I could think of was the fact there was someone in my bed right behind me. It was very clear in my mind that I was not alone. I felt a cold chill at the nape of my neck, a rhythmic blow, and I realized it heavily resembled someone breathing in and out on me. It felt so cold and horrifying. I could feel their eyes boring into the back of my head, eyes that stared without blinking or breaking away, that were focused solely on watching me. Such a disgusting feeling. I was on the verge of beginning to panic. Just when I thought I couldn't be any more terrified, I heard something that made my heart feel like it was being gripped by an ice-cold hand. I heard a voice begin whispering in my ear. I couldn't quite understand what it was saying, and it seemed to come from a place that I couldn't pinpoint. It's so hard to describe. It was almost as if it was coming from inside the ground, or from the walls right next to me. There, but not really there. perhaps even from inside my own mind. It seemed to reverberate directly inside my head. I was so beyond scared. No adjectives can do justice to how those moments felt. I wanted to run. I wanted to get up, run away, and never come back to that room. I couldn't help but think how my parents were sleeping soundly, only meters away, and I couldn't even open my mouth to call out to them for help. I tried to move a part of my body. I wanted to make anything happen, a twitch of a finger, a squeak from my throat, a shudder, an itch, anything. I couldn't do it, no matter how hard I tried. I focused on using all the strength I had in my body, but it refused to do anything. I felt movement in the bed as whoever this was shuffled closer to me. I lost it. I don't know what happened. I think my mind just couldn't handle any more. I passed out of sheer fear. I woke up on the floor, in the same position I'd been in on the bed. It felt as though I'd been laying there for hours. I tried to move, and thankfully I could do so at that point. I jumped up and looked at my alarm clock, and was amazed to see that only 10 minutes had passed since all that had happened. I ran over to the light switch and turned it on. I felt a lot better with the light illuminating the room. I struggle with the idea that this was all just a nightmare, because the voices I heard and the breath I felt on my neck seemed all too real. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. Just a side note that I feel is worth mentioning. I brought our family dog into the bedroom as soon as this was all over for comfort, and my dog did something very interesting. He began barking at one particular corner of the ceiling. You might expect that scared the living daylights out of me. It was like the presence I'd felt was somehow still in the room, only this time I couldn't see where it was. Nothing has really happened since that night, and although some of you reading this might find it bizarre, I'm still living and sleeping in that very same bedroom. I heard this from an acquaintance of mine, and it's really stayed with me over the years. Maybe it'll do the same for you too. A few years ago, there was this huge earthquake in Hokkaido, and the island was severely damaged by the tsunami it caused. An acquaintance of mine was on a transportation ship at the time the tsunami struck. I should say that we work in the same industry. We both chose a life at sea. He was anchored in Hokkaido, so he hurriedly offered his assistance in any rescue efforts. He put himself forward to support disaster relief missions and started out working on land-based rescue efforts. Quickly, he was drafted in to help out at sea as well. There were many missing people out there, probably pulled out by the tide, and they needed to go in search of them. He was told due to his work background that he would be the man for the job. He had no problem getting to work right away. As a result of his efforts, more than a dozen were found. Unfortunately, all of them had passed away. With a heavy heart and the bodies on board, he headed back to port to report his tragic findings to the organizer of the disaster relief mission. He was asked a favor in return. I want you to keep these bodies on board for the night. We're not equipped to store them at the moment, due to the urgent demands of the rescue operations. Is there any way you could do that for us? Since the ship was a transportation ship, he wasn't short of space or proper storage, so he agreed, wanting to help out in any way he could. He decided to place them at the bottom of the ship where the vehicle hangar was. It was pretty wide and much cooler down there, which would help with preservation. I can't imagine how he must have felt, having to deal with all of that. He covered the bodies with blankets and large plastic sheets and left them down there overnight. His crew lit incense sticks and prayed for the souls of the victims. They all wanted to keep the incense burning overnight as a mark of respect and to ease the passing into what lied beyond. They were worried about what might happen if the sticks burned during the night, though, so he and his crew took shifts to watch over the area. At some point, my acquaintance noted how tired his crewmates were and offered to watch over them from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. or so and give the others some rest. They had been taking turns with rescue efforts in the meantime and watching the area as well. 2 a.m. rolled around, and of course it was incredibly dark on board the ship. He said that due to some specific controlled lights, the only light source that was on down there with the bodies were these small red LED lights along the pathway that didn't make for the best atmosphere. He said it felt almost as though he was in a haunted house. The smell the bodies were beginning to give off was difficult to deal with as well. A strong, fishy odor. He was all alone down there in the dark with the dead. Once again, I cannot imagine how that must have felt. I don't know if I could have done what he and his crew did. He was scared of the atmosphere. He happily admitted that to me. He was so scared that he sat with his back facing the bodies under those plastic sheets. He just didn't want to look at them. As soon as it was 4 a.m., he raced to get out of there and change places with one of his crewmates. He had to climb a long case of metal stairs to get from the vehicle hangar to the quarters on the second floor, where the rest of his crewmates were. There was a large mirror at the top of the stairs, big enough to see a whole person's body. He did his best not to look in the mirror. He didn't want to chance seeing anything spooky. Mirrors are creepy enough in a darkened room, or if you wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, but it must have been even creepier in this situation. He told me that as he slowly walked past the mirror in the dim red lighting, for some reason he decided to go against his fears and glance at himself in that mirror. He said he did that for the briefest of moments because he suddenly sensed that he was not alone. He hadn't felt like that before that moment. He was scared of being down there with the bodies, but he'd felt like he was all alone. All of a sudden, once he reached the top of the stairs, he felt someone right up on his back. He ran to wake up his crewmate to take over for him. Just as he started to get ready to get some sleep, he took off his work clothes in preparation for the following day, and when he looked down at his shirt, he froze in horror. There were faint wet handprints all along his back. He had no idea how those had gotten there. When he was all alone with the bodies of the victims, he couldn't help but think that he wasn't alone after all. Sometimes I wonder if those mysterious handprints were a mark of thanks from a hand reaching out from beyond. Perhaps he provided them some comfort by watching over them. I've flown with my 1-year-old solo nearly a dozen times. Usually, people are understanding and kind about me having a baby on my lap, and overall he's a happy and very easy baby. He's also very cute, so it's not uncommon for strangers to talk to him, and usually I don't mind at all. The last trip I took, I sat alone in my aisle, with a man sitting by himself directly behind me. My baby was tired and fussing a bit. I knew that he was sleepy, but there's not a lot I could do until after we took off. Right out the gate, the man behind me started talking to my baby. He was saying things like, "Oh, hi, baby. Why you sad? What a cute little baby." I smiled and replied that he was just tired and apologized for the fuss. After the takeoff, I got him all settled in for his little nap. The man behind us continued to talk to my baby, putting his hand through the seats to try and grab at his feet. Multiple times I asked him very nicely to stop that. My baby was tired and he was keeping him from getting any rest. Finally, I just set my baby down next to me so I could make a bottle. Suddenly, the man behind me stood up and reached over my seat to grab him. Immediately, I leaned forward and picked up my baby. I said that I didn't need any help and for him to stop right now. The man pushed me back into my seat while mumbling, "What a sweet baby. Why are you crying, baby?" I thought that would be the end of things once I picked my baby back up, but I was wrong. I tried to rock him to sleep while trying desperately not to lose my cool. As I was calming my baby by rocking him, the man behind me reached through our seats again and grabbed my arm quite hard. "No rocking. Don't rock him, you'll make him cry." I pulled free from the man and yelled for him to not touch me again. I started rocking my baby a second time. This time, the man behind me reached both hands around either side of my seat and tried to grab me and started yelling, "No rocking! Stop rocking!" I was somewhat embarrassed that I completely lost it. I clutched my baby to my chest while struggling to get free of him. He was grabbing me so hard that it actually started to physically hurt. I hit the call light while screaming for him to let me go. He was still grabbing onto my arms when the flight attendants came running. I could barely get anything out to them. Everyone around us was staring. I was sobbing, and all I could get out was that I could not sit there anymore, and for the love of God to please move me. The man behind me tried to follow me to my new seat, but I told the flight attendants that I did not know who he was, and he could not come with me. I had a good cry in my new seat, as my baby immediately fell to sleep, and I was moved to an area next to the flight attendants' seats. After calming down a bit, I explained to them exactly what happened. Multiple times, the man that had been behind me got up and tried to follow me when he thought no one was looking, only to be turned around by one of the flight attendants. Toward the end of the flight, one of the attendants told me that they'd explained everything to the pilot, and the pilot had called the local police to escort the man off the flight, and I guess the FBI was called as well. I would be escorted off, and everyone around us watched everything happen. He was jeered as he was escorted. I had to interview with the FBI, and nearly missed my next flight. After my trip was done, I had to fly back going to the same airport. It was stressful and emotional to say the least, even knowing that he had been banned from that airline. I haven't flown ever since then. This happened when I was in high school. It happened on a Saturday. That day, it had been raining non-stop since the morning. With little other options, I texted my friends and played some online games with them. Before I knew it, it was the afternoon, and the rain hadn't shown any signs of letting up at all. Once it got around to 7 p.m., I gave up all hope of going out for the day. It was still hammering down out there. I was lounging around watching some TV at home. There was an interruption to the scheduled programming, a local warning telling residents to be aware of potential flooding. I'd say we got that warning at around 8 p.m. or so. My family of 6 were all huddled in the living room together. We were just carrying on with our night. I don't know why, but none of us really seemed that worried by the warnings on the TV. I don't know how long we were sitting there for, but after a while I suddenly heard a dull clicking sound, and everything suddenly went dark. We were left in pitch black darkness. My father stumbled off towards his bedroom, mumbling something about going to grab a torch. He lit the way using his smartphone. My mother got up to look outside. The power seemed to have been knocked out for the whole neighborhood. It was so dark inside the house that it almost seemed to amplify the sound of the rain falling. It was still showing no signs of letting up at all. That made me think about those warnings we'd heard earlier. The rest of my family got up to go find some lights or head back to their bedrooms to look for some candles or something. I stayed in the living room with my grandma for a while. She said that we might need to evacuate if things got any worse. I wanted to go get my phone so I could tell my friends what was going on. I went back into my room and grabbed it. I was scrolling through some social media when I noticed that my battery was a little low. I thought that I'd better save the rest just in case I needed it for an emergency. I spent some of the time looking out at the rainfall, listening to the drops falling. It was pretty relaxing, actually. Even though I was and still am a bit of a night owl, I started to feel sleepy. I remembered that I had an old battery charger in a drawer somewhere, so I found that and put my phone on charge. I killed some time by reading some manga by torchlight. Eventually, I heard no TV on downstairs, no more chatter of the family. Everything was quiet. I guess everyone else had decided to get an early night. Maybe the rain wasn't going to be as bad as they said it would be on TV. It had gotten to around 10 p.m. or so, when suddenly the doorbell began to ring. It was late, and we never really heard the doorbell ring at that time of night. I guess this was a somewhat different set of circumstances, though. I thought it might be our friendly neighbor, Mr. Saito. He might have come over to see how we were all doing, or give us some important information. Maybe he was telling us it was time to go evacuate. I left my bedroom on the second floor and headed downstairs. I was surprised that it looked like I was the only one going to open the door. Maybe everyone else was still sound asleep. As I headed downstairs, I noticed there was a huge shadow behind the frosted glass of our front door. Very big. Not looking like my neighbor at all. Just in case, I called out his name. "Mr. Saito?" Whoever the shadow belonged to behind the glass didn't reply. They just stood there motionless. I started to get a bit scared at that point. I knew it certainly wasn't my neighbor, and if it was someone else there to help, why would they just stand there in silence? It looked like whoever was standing outside was trying to get a view of the interior. Before I knew it, I found myself backing away from the door. I saw the figure shift from side to side, as though they were about to try and open the door. My mind went blank, and I ran as fast as I could upstairs to the safety of my room. I slammed the door and stood behind it. It was the first time in my life I stood stock still, unable to think rationally. The doorbell began to ring again and again. For some reason, I was panicking. I still remember it vividly. I think back on it nowadays, and I can still picture that dark figure behind the door. After the doorbell continued to ring, I heard my father making noises downstairs. Finally, someone else was up as well. I now felt brave enough to leave my bedroom and listen to what was going on from the hallway. I leaned over the banister and saw my grandfather and grandmother joined my father in the lounge. I went down a few stairs to be within earshot. The doorbell had since stopped ringing. I heard my father asking everyone if they'd also heard the bell and looked toward the front door. I saw the shadow was now gone. All of a sudden, though, the doorbell began to ring again. I watched my grandpa open the door. He had thrown it open as quickly as he could, but by the time the door was wide open, there was no one to be seen. Feeling nervous about this, he slammed the door shut again, and I swear in that brief moment, I saw a shadow dart out of a nearby bush. Someone was out there, hiding and waiting for an opportunity. They probably thought they could take my grandpa on if they had to. My dad was shocked to see this. I could see the fear on his face as he ran upstairs right past me to wake up my mom and sister. My dad gathered all of us in the living room. Just as he was telling us to calm down, we heard a tremendous noise coming from outside. I heard tree limbs snapping and the sliding of something heavy. We lived in the shade of a big mountain. I know what I heard was the sound of a landslide. The mud, boulders, and trees on the mountain were soon to be heading towards our area on a river of rainfall. My dad was screaming at everyone to get in the car right now. We should have given more respect to the warnings we'd heard on TV. We piled into the car. There were clumps of earth in the streets, sand everywhere. It was a real mess. Everything was coming down, and the water was so fast it was honestly terrifying. The roads were treacherous, but my dad managed to navigate through that path of destruction. We got far enough away to feel safe. We learned later that our family home had suffered major damages. If we delayed leaving any longer than that, any one of us could have been swept away in the flood waters. It was a real close call. If it weren't for that person by our door that night, I don't think any of us would have been awake and alert enough to realize a landslide was going to happen. Honestly, I was content to just hide in my room that night. If it had not been for the doorbell ringer, we might have never made it to the car in time, and we would have been trapped in our house or washed away in the flood. I'm lucky to be here, and I think we all are. Some of my family even wonders if perhaps that wasn't even a thief at all, and maybe it was a guardian spirit of some sort. Back when I was in junior high school, I was taken on a class trip into the mountains. It was called a mountaineering camp. There were about 30 of us in total, boys, girls, and teachers. We were all riding the bus to the campsite, but we got delayed due to an accident on the roads. That meant we would be getting there much later than expected, but still light out. When we arrived, we got off the bus with our class teacher at the helm and headed into the woods up toward the mountain campsite. The road to the campsite was very well signposted, and the direction was very linear. Even the dumbest of us couldn't get lost or stray from the trail. Confident in that fact, I followed on at the back of the group. I mean, everyone knows the cool kids go to the back, right? At some point, though, my legs got tired or I got bored of walking or whatever, so I figured I would take a quick break. Surely everything would be fine. I could be pretty quick when I wanted to be. I could still see my classmates' backs going up the mountain ahead, so I waited until they were just in sight, and the second I couldn't see them, I rose to my feet and started climbing. I think I must have left a little too late, though, because I wasn't nearly as quick as I thought I would be. The trail was very tough, and I just couldn't catch up to them. I was getting nervous. I tried to go as fast as I could to catch them, but no matter what I did, I could not even catch a sight of anyone's backs anymore. It was getting darker and darker, too. Before I knew it, it got so dark that I couldn't even see my surroundings clearly anymore. I wasn't nervous anymore. Instead, I was on the verge of panic. I did what I thought would be best and started calling out the names of my closest friends. I couldn't even make out which direction was up or down anymore. Tears were filling my eyes. I was scared of being lost in the woods and angry at myself for not keeping up with my classmates. I had to keep moving, though. I thought that if I kept going forward, surely I would eventually find them and everything would be fine. After a while, I thought I could see a flicker of yellow in the darkness ahead of me. We had been given these yellow ponchos for the trip, sort of like raincoats, and we were to wear them if it began to rain. I'd been so distracted by being frightened that I hadn't noticed that it started to rain. I called out, thinking it must be one of my classmates, but I guess they couldn't hear me because they didn't stop or respond to me at all. I tried to up the pace to catch up to them, but I couldn't go much faster than I was already going. I tried to close the gap between me and them. They were only about 20 or so meters ahead of me. I kept calling out to them, but they still didn't respond. I just couldn't catch up. Knowing they weren't going to stop and that I wasn't going to stop them, I paused to catch my breath for a moment and put on my own yellow poncho. I stood there waiting, but the more I did, I came to realize there was no way my classmate wouldn't have heard me just then. I stood there in the pitch-black darkness, now completely lost and terrified. I don't know how long I was there for, but it felt like hours. When all looked darkest, I saw a light flickering between the trees. 3 people were approaching. One was the teacher. I didn't think I could cry anymore at that point. When I saw them, though, I started wailing. The place they'd found me was an hour's walk up the mountain from the campsite. I had somehow passed it entirely. It was the strangest thing. Everyone was so relieved to see me. But above all, I was just relieved to have been found at all. There was one thing left unresolved, though. That classmate I thought I saw? No one had been out searching alone. I was being led somewhere by someone. Whoever I was following was not one of my classmates. A lot of missing persons cases have happened out there in the mountains, and there are some theories about what goes on in those mountain ranges. Who knows what could have happened to me if I continued to follow behind that person. This happened roughly 2 years ago. It was summer and early nighttime. The only thing that was unexpected that night was the light rain that was falling. I was quite proud of my vehicle and used to love taking it out on long drives. I didn't care where I went, as long as there was an open road ahead of me. I liked going out on weekday nights where there was less traffic. That way, I could just cruise along the mountain roads on the weekdays. They were great for drifting, and I was just getting into that. I put a lot of money into my car, and it was tuned up to the max. I was with a friend this time as well. Well, not exactly with him, I guess. He was just driving alongside me. We used to go driving on these mountain pass roads because we knew they were very quiet. Before we even got anywhere near the mountains, though, I just felt as if something was kind of off that night. There was a weird vibe in the air. I put it down to the unexpected rain in summer. My friend said that he wanted to go a bit further into the mountainous woods that night. I guess I sort of did too, since I was bored of just drifting around the same old curves as usual. I smiled as we passed some beware of animal signs, thinking that we were invincible. I guess that's just how it is when you're young. I'd seen some animals crossing the dark roads at night, so the signs weren't that intimidating to me. I saw 3 animals that night actually, nothing really impressive or frightening. A weasel, a big bird, and a tanuki. A tanuki is a kind of raccoon native to Japan, by the way. One of my friends told me a story that he'd once seen an animal with a glowing white body one night out there. I just laughed that off. I never seen anything strange like that. Not to mention, there were no streetlights in the mountains for anything to reflect off of. Nothing but darkness, really. I teased him that he'd witnessed an optical illusion. We kept on driving, and it got later and later. I mean, we always headed out late, but it was almost 3 a.m. now, and we weren't even heading back home yet. At some point, though, I'd had enough. To be honest, I was running low on gas, and didn't feel like wasting the rest driving around in the middle of nowhere. I turned around and put my hazards on, and sent my friend a message to tell him I was leaving. I sat there messing around with my phone while waiting for my friend to reply. He seemed to be taking his sweet time. I thought to myself, man, screw this, I'm tired. I figured my friend would understand if I took off a bit early. I gave him a couple minutes more, though. I gave him till the end of my smoke. I lit up and cracked the window open a little. The rain was falling on the roof of the car, making a quite relaxing noise. It wasn't very heavy, but also not light enough for me to stand outside and smoke my cigarette. It was at this point when I began to hear a strange noise. There was a faint wailing sound. It was quiet, but definitely there. It wasn't as loud as the rain, but I could still hear it all the same. I knew that some animals could make calls that sounded almost human, and I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. No matter how hard I tried, though, I could not do so. With each passing second, the realization sunk in that I was hearing someone crying. I remember sitting there, the smell of tobacco and the drumming of rain around me, the sound of my windscreen wipers going back and forth. I had the key to the ignition in my hand. I wanted to go see what was going on, but something inside me told me I should not approach any closer. The sobbing got louder, and there was now a new sound accompanying it. I paused the windscreen wipers so I could listen a little closer. I could just about make out a child wailing. The crying I'd heard before was undoubtedly the cries of a woman, but now there was a baby in the mix as well. The road was slippery, but I felt as if I should pull away right now. I really hated the sound of that sobbing woman and child. I knew deep down that there was no reason a woman and child would be out there in the middle of nowhere at that time of night. It may sound callous of me, but I got the hell out of there without investigating at all. It wasn't until about a month later when I discovered that a woman and her son had been murdered by her husband that very night in that area. What a dark thing to do. Apparently their bodies had only recently been discovered when I found out about it. They had been out there in the heat of summer and the cold of the rain and wind for some time after. I'm pretty sure that what I heard that night had something to do with that. And if it was, I feel sorry that I didn't do anything, and I hope that their souls can rest at peace. Me and a friend I'll call Robert had just spent the day in a city a few hours from our own. We spent the day at an event in which we had both participated and had a real blast together. After the event ended, we decided to go out and get dinner with a group of our friends and ended up staying in the city until almost midnight. Around that time, we decided we should probably get going. The drive home was very uneventful for most of the way there. The roads in between these two cities are very rural, with only a few small towns between the two. Since it was dark, we spent most of the drive looking for animals that may run out into the road while chatting with each other. As we got fairly close to Robert's house, we saw a car on the opposite side of the road, facing the wrong way, and a man was just walking around in the middle of the road. The car in front of us just so happened to be an ambulance, which stopped to try and help the man. As we drove past, I made eye contact with him, and we continued on our way thinking nothing of what just happened. We drove for another 20 to 30 minutes before turning onto the access road to get to Robert's house. As we got farther up the road, though, we noticed another car had turned in on the road behind us. Robert lives in a gated community, so we had to turn onto the driveway so we could go through the gate. This is when we noticed that the car behind us turned again and was following us. As we pulled up to the gate, Robert opened it and we drove through. The car behind us sped up and managed to slip in before the gate closed. Neither of us had even thought we were being followed until this point, but even then we just kinda joked about it. We drove around for a while inside of this gated community, which was fairly large, and we noticed the car following every movement behind us. The route we took only led to his area, so we figured he should have turned off by now. As we got close to his house, we decided to keep on going, as the road would eventually loop around and confirm we were being followed. At this point, we called my friend's dad, who watched us drive by with the car behind us. As we came around to the looping point, we realized that we really were being followed. Robert started driving much quicker through the neighborhood, and the car behind us also sped up quite a bit. We were going 60 miles per hour down these small roads, but the other car didn't hesitate at all. We drove for a while before we decided to head to the front gate, which had a 24-hour security guard. We still were not sure if the person following us even had a key fob to open the gate or not. We left the neighborhood and pulled a U-turn back to the front gate. We were still driving very fast at that point, and to anyone watching, it would have been very apparent we were being chased. As we came back to the front gate, my friend was able to open it in a way we couldn't be followed. As we turned the corner, we saw the gate opening again, and the car that was following us drove past it. This is where we made a huge mistake. We turned down a road without realizing it was a cul-de-sac. As soon as we noticed, Robert flipped the car around so we could get out of there. But as we drove by that car, I made eye contact with the driver. I could barely see his face. When we turned out of that area, we turned off the lights and booked it. We finally managed to shake the guy and get to Robert's house. We waited there for police to arrive. Shortly after the officer arrived, he got a call on his radio and booked it back to his vehicle. A few minutes later, 2 more cars showed up, and we were informed they had found the man. The man was the very same guy we'd passed on the side of the road an hour earlier. When police first made contact with him, he refused to speak and was clearly not in a right state of mind. As the stop proceeded, he began to threaten the officers. We found out later he was a mentally ill, unstable veteran from multiple states away and had no reason to be anywhere close to where we were. The man had broken the back gate when he followed us in. The worst part of all of this is that the guy at the front gate, whose only job was to not let people in if they didn't have a fob, let this guy in after we sped past him, thinking that he must have been with us. Needless to say, he was very quickly fired by the security company. Looking back, there's only one thing I would have changed. I would have called the police sooner, but the adrenaline of the moment clouded our judgment. A few years ago, my boss let me and my family stay at his mountain home. It's not a secluded place at all. In fact, it's pretty nearby to several other houses. It's a nice community, with nice people living there, but it can still feel secluded when you're inside the home. It was built in the 70s and had a spiral staircase, 2 floors. The top floor is level with the upper slope, and the bottom floor is an exact mirror of the top that's level with the bottom of the slope. We always board our dog up, but because this was a last-minute trip and a big travel weekend, we had to bring them with us. The night started off perfectly. It was cold and raining, and we had the fireplace going. We were watching some Office, and the kids were fast asleep. A short time later, my wife and I turned everything off, checked the doors, and went to bed ourselves. I don't know how much time had passed since then, maybe 15 to 20 minutes or so. I began to hear some light thudding sounds. It was raining and kind of windy, so maybe the branches from this one tree were hitting the back wall. Then, though, I heard what sounded like someone coming up the spiral stairs. As soon as my mind processed the noise, my dog, who had been sleeping in the living room, began to raise absolute hell. I'd never heard her do this before. I grabbed my pistol and went downstairs, where I saw muddy shoe prints leading in and out from the front door on the bottom floor. I was completely perplexed. I knew we had locked that door, but there were no signs of forced entry at all. While I was looking around, my wife called the police. They actually pulled up to the neighbor's house as she was on the call. My wife and kids loaded up in the car, and we drove to the neighbor's driveway. Came to find out they'd just experienced the same thing. Someone entering their home from the front door, dog raising hell, no signs of forced entry. We left a statement with the police. I hated to do this because it was 11 p.m. at this point, but I called my boss and told him we were going to stay in a hotel and head home the next day. It really freaked all of us out. I don't know what came from that particular incident, but about a week after this, I was Googling the area again. One of those pages that lists the arrests in the area popped up with a headline that said, "Man arrested after break-in and attack." I don't recall the exact headline, though. About a week after that, another article came out that had more information about the victim. After another quick Google and property search, I found out the victim lived just one road over. My gut says it was the same guy, but I can't exactly say for sure. I hope not, because he was a big, violent guy, 6'2" and 275 pounds. We love the mountains and have been back, but we've stayed in hotels since then. We tried a nice little private cabin thing, but nobody could get to sleep. In college, 2018 to 2014 or so, I was an avid metal detectorist. I knew of an old military trail and river crossing way back in a secluded portion of the woods. I knew many others were not aware of that area, so I finally decided one winter morning that I was going to go out and metal detect it finally. The trail was about a mile or two from a city park, along the South Concho River in San Angelo, Texas. I parked my truck, grabbed all my gear, which included a serrated tool for digging, and began my trek through the raw woods and brush for the trail. About halfway into the trees, I got into a clearing and found a tent and campsite about 40 yards back from the river. It was very isolated. There were cans laying all around, some clothes and other stuff that made it evident someone was currently using it. I didn't hang around for long, though, and kept going on my way. As I was just getting past that area, all of a sudden this haggard-looking guy stumbled out of a bush just a few feet from me. I startled him as much as he startled me. After some innocent chit-chat back and forth, he asked what I was doing out there. I told him about the old trail and my metal detecting hobby, and lied that it was a pretty well-known site for hobbyists just like me. That latter part seemed to get him very nervous. He started asking if I'd detected around his campsite any, and I told him no, except for accidentally stepping on one of his cans. He was mostly concerned if I had checked the area around the tent itself, though, which truthfully I hadn't done at all. The guy relayed that his wife had kicked him out of their apartment a few days ago, and he was just staying in the woods until he could get back on his feet. That story didn't really make much sense in my mind, but I didn't ask him much else about it. Finally, I told him I was going to get on my way, and with a weird look on his face, he suggested I not go any further. He tried to say it was because he'd recently used the bathroom back there. Whether there was fresh fertilizer back there or not, there was no way I was going to be hanging around with this suspicious guy. I went a little further on the trail because I wanted to metal detect, but I'd never felt quite so uncomfortable. I made a quick turnaround and headed back to my truck fairly quickly. Never saw or heard about the guy again until about 2 years later. His picture was in the local news, being apprehended by the authorities from the murder of his wife. He'd killed her and stored her in the exact area of the woods where I encountered him that day. Even though I can't recall what day it was exactly, he had just recently completed the matter when we met each other. This happened a long time ago, back when I was a student. I was a student 25 years ago, mind you. I've told this story only to a few close friends over the years. Let's just say I'm not the most extroverted person out there. Maybe that goes some way to explaining why I've kept this to myself for so long. Well, the road I'm heading down at this age, I guess it doesn't matter much anymore. Anyway, one of my friends, maybe my best friend, really loved cars and driving. I remember he called me up one night and said he was going to pick me up in his brand new car. I knew how excited he was to get it. It was all he could speak about. It was a Nissan Skyline GTR. Very cool at the time, trust me. Naturally, he wanted to take a drive outside of the city. The only roads that opened up more than the ones in the city were the ones that led out to the wilderness. I went to university in Nagoya, and there were loads of mountain roads there. Those roads were long and winding, and the nights were just as long as well. As a student, it was always a bit nice to get out there into nature and relax. We were heading out along these mountain roads, and my friend was reaching speeds that I hadn't quite prepared for. I doubt he did either, to be honest. Had there been one of those oncoming sharp corners, we probably wouldn't be here today. We decided to take a break from the reckless driving when we wound up near the summit of the mountain, as far as the roads would take us at least. There was a parking lot up there, and I think it was about 1 a.m. at this point. I figured that soon we would head back toward the city, maybe stop off somewhere to grab some ramen and call it a night. That was the usual practice during our student days. My friend racing down all those mountain passes kind of stressed me out a bit. I told him to slow down more than once, but he told me there were no cars out on those roads that late at night. I knew that was not always the case. He just kept going faster and faster, though. I wish he didn't. I saw something bright coming up behind us at one point and looked over in the side mirror for a moment. I couldn't make out what it was, though. I knew that whatever it was coming at a tremendous speed. My friend noticed it as well, and I saw him glancing into his rear-view mirror. He accelerated even further. He didn't want to be beaten in his new car. He didn't want to let the vehicle behind him overtake him. The vehicle behind didn't give in, though. It was right on our tail. I don't know why, but I figured maybe we had upset someone that night by the way we were driving. That was what I thought at the time, at least. I thought it was the headlights of a car or a truck or something, but it wasn't quite clear. As they got closer, my friend looked in the rearview mirror and said he thought it might be a motorbike following us. He could only see one light behind us. I looked back over my shoulder toward the back window and saw it was in fact just a singular light, getting closer and closer. At that point, my friend suddenly shouted at me not to look at it. I snapped back into my chair and sat upright. He told me it couldn't be a real light, because he said as he stared into it in the mirror, he could see faces emerging and disappearing back into its bright maw. As he was saying that, he seen something that chilled him so much to his core that he smacked the rearview mirror with his fist so hard that it dropped into my lap. He just kept saying over and over again to not look back no matter what. We drove faster. It wasn't a thrill anymore. It seemed to be out of necessity now, whatever was going on. It wasn't fun in the slightest. We started to get further away from whatever this was. I could tell by the way the light was fading in the car, getting dimmer. Even though it was getting darker, I knew that whatever was behind us was still trying to follow us. I didn't know what was going on. After a while, we approached the lights of the city, and the light became dimmer and dimmer. After what felt like the longest time, I found the courage to look behind me. As I looked back, though, whatever it was long gone. The whole event was pretty scary, and we didn't know what to think. We hypothesized theories over our ramen once we were in the safety of the light once more. Not that light out there in the woods, though. The fluorescent lights of human civilization. We couldn't get our heads around what just happened. We really didn't know how to explain it at all. We went to bed that night with more questions than answers on our minds. I guess that's what prompted my friend to ask me the next day if I wanted to go back to those mountain roads we had driven through the night before to do a little investigation. I said yes, of course. I wanted to find out just as much as he did. We drove for a while. When we saw something that it's up to you to believe or not. As we continued driving through the area where we'd seen that mysterious light, we saw a memorial with bouquets of flowers laying by the side of the road. Maybe, just maybe, that strange light that followed behind us was a warning to us from the departed, someone who had been driving too fast, or a victim of some kind of hit-and-run tragedy from idiots like we were. We thought the roads were all safe and clear to drive as fast as we wanted to, but that really taught us a lesson to not behave so recklessly. I'm just happy we were able to escape all right in the end. My friend never drove as fast as he did that night ever again. It's something I've thought about over the years, and it's pretty creepy to be sure. I don't know if I'm just making weird connections or if something else entirely was at play. Either way, it was a very scary experience. Years ago, I was driving home from college for Christmas break, and my beat-up old Honda Civic. It was a very rainy day in the mountains, on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The car actually had an 8-track player built in. I had a cartridge-shaped adapter that I could insert a cassette tape into, so I could listen to various music. I was a bit too sleepy, but jamming to my tunes, when all of a sudden I heard this garbled sound coming from my speakers. I looked down and saw the cassette was unspooling. I pulled the cassette and came up with a fistful of loose tape, which I fixated on for a moment. When I happened to look up, I saw I was all the way in the breakdown lane. By instinct, I jerked the wheel left. Big mistake. The wet road caused me to oversteer, and suddenly I was careening sideways off the highway. I hit the embankment, and my car began flipping over and over and over, more than 5 times. It all happened in what seemed like slow motion. With every roll, all I could think was that I was going to die, and then just as sudden as it happened, it was all over. My car was upright, sitting in the grass perpendicular to the turnpike. Except for some soreness on my body, I seemed physically okay. All of my windows had shattered, and the roof had crumpled about 3 inches. I crawled out of my vehicle in complete shock. All of my possessions were scattered in a 300-yard swath on the embankment behind me. There was an overpass 300 yards in front of me. Soon, people began to pull over. It also turned out there was a state trooper hiding in a speed trap just past the bridge. I was completely detached and emotionless, as though everything seemed to be happening to someone else and not me. Eventually, a wrecker showed up, and I hitched a ride with my totaled car to a rural gas station. At that point, my car was deposited into a small salvage yard. I reached out to my father, who came to get me, but was 2 hours away. I started emptying what was left of the stuff from inside my car when I noticed the wreck next to mine. It was a tan Accord hatchback, exactly the same as my car. The front driver's side was caved in from the hood to the back of the driver's seat, where there was a brown, rusty stain. The car was still packed with clothing and other personal items. That's when it really hit me. If there had been any obstruction at all, anything besides soft grass in my path, I would be just as dead as the former owner of that car was. I remember one time I was at home alone, but I thought I wasn't. That was because once I came in, someone had turned the TV on, and every time I went to the kitchen or the toilet, I looked over at the living room and could see someone sitting on the couch watching TV. They looked just like my sister. I swear it was her every time I looked. We didn't talk or make any eye contact, mind you, but I was absolutely certain it was her. It was not like a silhouette you would see if she was under a blanket on the couch or something. I was certain it was her. I remember that I was in my room when someone suddenly knocked on the door. I didn't go to open it, since the living room was closer, and I was sure my sister would do it for me. Whoever it was kept knocking, though, and I yelled out my sister's name and told her to go open the door. That was when I heard her voice coming from outside, saying that she didn't have her keys on her. At that moment, I froze in my place. I ran to the living room to see what the hell was going on, but there was no one there. The TV was still on, though. I opened the door, and my sister gave me the most angry look. I could tell immediately she was not messing with me, and she really had been outside the whole time. To this day, I still don't know who that was, or how they managed to escape without my sister noticing. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, Please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.